This is the 6th episode of Writer's Block. I apologize for fucking up the last episode, and you'll see that there's not a fourth person in the square, in the block tonight. But you know, it's sort of a weird thing with when the episodes fails like that. It's like I was thinking about getting a guest, and it's just like, who do I want to alienate and annoy this week? So I want to go ahead and welcome Max and Sam to the show. But Sam, Max, how was I Am Sydney? You went there, right? And you saw people.
Yeah.
Is there any fun anecdotes, any personal revelations you want to make at the beginning of the show?
Nothing that I can say without waiting for like 6 to 8 months for all the fucking shit to drop. No. It was fun, just talking to pro players and stuff, just hanging out, especially talking to all the like Australians, because there was, I think, a bit of solidarity in amongst the press room when you just see like all these sort of dejected Australian players who sort of got famous through Twitter and shit, just like wandering up after going through like a press gauntlet, because there were so many traditional media people there from like just like random radio stations in Sydney, and they would go up to the players and be just like, "Oh, so is this your first time in Sydney? Do females have a place in esports? How many hours do you play a week? Is it hard to sit in one spot for like and shit like that?" And so then that's one thing, if you want to go into an anecdote that I learned, was just if you start an interview just by like going super specific straight away, then the player's just like, "Oh my God, you're not one of those people." So like a lot of my questions I had to switch around in the actual articles. But for example, in like an automatic interview, I heard the questions that were being asked to him, which were like that. And so I just immediately started the interview just like, oh yeah, so talking about like styles and secondary calling and sort of the more nuanced elements of C9. And so that was one thing I learned. But other than that, it's pretty cool to talk to people, talk to pros. Definitely will go to more events. It's good.
I don't know. When I watch tournaments that take place in America, it's just like I have that self-hatred thing. It's like, can you not do the America thing? Did you get that? It's like, put your shoes away, guys. Like, funny.
I was so triggered that my like psyche just become calloused to the point where I just sat in the crowd and just like, it was the worst shit, dude. I only sat in the crowd like a couple times with Zvonimir, professor from HLTV.
Oh, okay.
He's a boy now, but he's like so Croatian. So it's just like there were times where I just look over at him and he just had that like stern Eastern European look, just as people are like just drinking beers out of shoes and shit like that. So he was like my sort of like touchstone for being grounded outside my own culture, which was good.
All right, Sam, how's your Twitter going? Everything okay? Any flame wars? Any DMs?
I'm having a bit of fun on Twitter. No, I'm having fun on Twitter these days. You know,
okay.
I'm trying to be a little more active. You know, I interact a lot with hockey Twitter in my own time because I'm Canadian. So, you know, it's kind of a necessity. And I've realized that, you know, even though there's some really annoying people on hockey Twitter, you know, like a lot of the people just like, you know, chat and have fun and, you know, spew shit and do hot takes and stuff like that. And I find that stuff really entertaining. So I've been trying to do more hot takes and kind of shoot the shit and make it clear that I'm shooting the shit. So like yesterday, I was trying to get people to comment on who they thought was the best on mousesports between Rops and, you know, all the players on mousesports and all that. That was fun. You know, people say different things and that's exciting. So hopefully that keeps burgeoning. Twitter is enjoyable when people actually are nice. So that's what's been going on with my Twitter.
Yeah, MSL thinks the same thing. Twitter's so much fun.
Well,
okay.
It was positive.
Sure, okay. So topic for this week is whose era is this? Or, yeah, what era is it? Just right off the bat, do you guys have an idea? Like, if in 6 months from now, what would you bet if you had to put money down? Like, what do you think is the highest? What name for the era do you think we're going to call it? You think it's going to be an Astralis era, like a combination of like Astralis or in another team, or do you think it's going to be like another sort of like uncertainty era where it's going to just be no top teams? Like, what would you say? Maybe Sam first.
The golden age of opping. That's what I think.
Oh, okay.
I know I'm biased, obviously, but I genuinely think that like ever since the op nerf, there's never been this many oppers that are having like a ton of impact on their teams, right? So I think that when we're going to look at this, and I don't think it's going to last because I think that some of these players are, in extremely high form. Like, I think the device has been in form that probably won't last. People like that, people like Walksake or something like that. But I think that these players are currently playing as simple as well. I think these players are playing at a level that, you know, we haven't seen for like years out of Oppers, and they're doing shit that we haven't seen for years out of Oppers. And I think that's going to be, in an age where, you know, random teams are winning all this stuff, the thing that stands out the most to me about this period is how many fucking awesome Oppers there are.
Max, similar question, Dodge. Do you have a? I mean, we sort of agreed before the show that we can do different ideas for eras, but like, do you think there's gonna, like, is there a top team? Do you think that's gonna, or a couple teams that you think will define this period of play?
Well, like Astralis, but of course, is just so absurdly good. Like, but then that was before they just got 3-0'd by FaZe. So if you told me like a week ago, I would have said in a heartbeat the Astralis era. But now that I'm sort of going to do a little question dodge of my own here, and I'm going to take like a more scoped out perspective, because one of the recurring things that all like consistently came up in pretty much every interview I did in Sydney was all the top teams just saying like the gap between the tier 3, the tier 2, and the tier 1 is just like minuscule in terms of individual player skill. Like Lekro said something like like there's no difference between semi-professional and professional players on like an individual aim level at all. And so taking that sort of framing, I'm looking at this sort of transitionary era of parity of skill and seeing teams more defined by their preparation and the choice they make stylistically and how to approach the game, more so than any individual sort of firepower. So I think that this era is like, if we're to look 6 months back, that this is going to be the transition into where CS becomes more of a team emphasized game, and that stylistic and more macro based concepts are the things that sort of choose as to who is the top team and who dominates. So another question, Dodge, for you there, Scott.
No, it's fine. All right, we'll come back to that sort of topic of like the general trend of the whole scene, like trying to come up with a broad through line. But Sam, is this heretical to you? I think a couple episodes back when we did the Danish episode, you were hyping up Astralis before they even won Marseille. You were saying, you got to check out these online games, man. Astralis is sick. But then they won Marseille, and then, they look like so visually impressive, you know, maybe not from like a raw, like, wow, this guy's the next Simple sort of thing, but a sense of like they just do so many things right, and it looks so coordinated. I mean, is this the team for you, going to a team-specific era question?
I think that, Astralis is probably going to be the best team. I don't think that unless SK figured their stuff out, I don't see a team that could really beat them on a consistent basis. But it might be the case that, I think it's probably likely it'll be the case that sort of like FaZe for quite a long period this year and the end of the last. FaZe was the best team, but like it was kind of, they weren't winning very much, if at all. And I think that what you're going to see with this Astralis team is that they're going to make a lot of semifinals and finals, but I don't think that they're going to win like 75% of titles, which is fine. Like when Fnatic was the best team in the world, they weren't necessarily winning all the titles. But at the same time, because Astralis has been supposed to be the best team in the world for a few times before, like I can think of at least 2 moments in time where they're supposed to be the best, and both times they kind of botched it in terms of dominance. The Astralis have never been like a team that was dominant for like a period of 6 months. Astralis has been a team that was like, oh wow, they're suddenly become super good and then slowly fall off, right? And that's happened when they were TSM, and then they became Astralis, right? When they were question mark and all that, they were amazing. 2015,
beginning of 2016.
Yeah, that happened last year, and it's happening this year. This year it looks a little different because you're looking around and no teams, there are no FaZes or SKs that look like they'll top them. But I do feel like they'll be susceptible to losing finals in the way that they just did. Not because they're choking, but just because they're a team that struggles when people start to read them. And I think that over time they're going to lose their edge in that sense. Not because they're playing any differently, but teams play differently surrounding what they're doing. I don't think that's what happened with FaZe in that final, but I think you're going to see that happen with different teams like Fnatic or something like that. But they do have, the reason that I think they're going to be the best team, and they're probably going to always be teams like Mouse, is because their map pool has 7 maps. And so they can beat like the teams that are sort of one-dimensional, that have 2 or 3 maps that they're really strong on. They can always, like, they just vetoed Mirage against Mouse, and Mouse is fucked.
Yeah.
Like, Mouse cannot win that best of 3 anymore unless they have a massive upset on any of the other maps. The best they can do is like win Dust 2 in that best of 3. They're not really going to win realistically a best of 3. So they're going to make a lot of top placings playing against teams like Mouse, but they're not. I don't think they're going to win 1 out of 2 lands even.
Okay. Okay, so I actually have a theory on this. I'm going to do an article on this pretty soon, hopefully. And this will sort of get back to Max's point, where, in my opinion, I think Astralis are sort of ahead of a curve. Maybe not ahead of a curve. Maybe that's too positive. What I'm trying to say is that Astralis is on a different time sync than it seems like the rest of the scene.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you had the uncertainty era in the end of 2016, towards the end of 2016, past the August player break, where a lot of teams look weak. You see teams like Fnatic break up, Navi be screwed by the coaching change and the combination of them dropping Zeus for Simple. You see Virtus Pro rise up to the top by virtue of there not being anyone else. Astralis, Fnatic, the French team start to fall apart as well. But then Astralis picks up Glaive mid stretch of tournaments in October instead of making a change later in January like everyone else. And they made a change that was different than what other teams did. In January, a lot of teams bulked up their lineup in terms of skill. You see G2, North, FaZe, SK, Cloud9, all increase in firepower, where the change that Astralis made was like a lateral change in terms of one in-game leader for another. So they were on a sort of different trajectory, and then when it came to making a player change again, they weren't stuck in the scenario where it was like, well, we stacked all the firepower, and now the team's breaking up, and all we can do is lose firepower because we have the best firepower in the team. It's just they just changing one of their supplementary players. So Astralis just sort of feels like it's on a different lineage, and that brings us into present day, where you see teams like FaZe, like SK sort of falling off with high skill cap teams, and Astralis is sort of positioned like where everyone else is falling off as being a top team again, and it seems like they are poised to have maybe not their era, like Sam was saying. Maybe we can't trust them to be a top the tournament winning team every time. But it does seem like they've just been thrust to the top of the scene through the maneuverings, through the sort of timing of it. Is this, Max, would you agree with this point? I remember we had some sort of DM session. We were messaging about sort of this general theory before we even started the show one time, where you were talking about how you saw the trajectory going from the uncertainty era to the that 2017 period with all the Ryzen skill.
Yeah, well, I definitely. So I have a lot of DM sessions, Scott. I'm a hoe when it comes to trying to get. I'm a massive hoe when it comes to trying to get that shit. But yeah, I do think I remember it, and I definitely agree with you in the sense that it's like Astralis might not win, but they're definitely the team most conducive to consistency, and in an era of play that's so much defined by the inconsistency of teams, and I feel like naturally the most consistent team will just be the one that sort of characterizes the era of play. But in terms of talking about how Astralis is just that, and I do agree with you, they do just feel ahead of the curve in terms of everyone else. Like they were the first big team to just straight up skip events and just like in preparation for more events coming up. I know that a bunch of teams are going to be doing that this year. Zipnik said that one of the things that that Astralis are looking at doing, and this is how fucking next level Astralis is, and Sam, try to hide your erection from showing on camera, but this shit is going to be insane. So he was talking about like how in terms of communication, like players like Dupree don't want to know everything because they have a certain way on T side. They want to clear every bomb site, and they have like a certain pathway in which they entry. And so say that someone's on like say Mirage and you have a player top mid and he calls a rotate, that someone might be at stairs or jungle. In Dupree's like mental state, he doesn't necessarily need to know that there's someone there, because that might fuck with which, like, sort of how long his crosshair is on a certain spot and where he's thinking the enemies will be. Whereas someone like Zipnix wants to know everything in the round. So Astralis are trying to develop a system where they can individually call things to certain teammates, so that you purposely neglect certain communication to certain players, so that they have more confidence when peeking an angle, so that they have confidence peeking to every angle. And so, like, that's the level that Astralis are thinking, like, not how can we improve our communication, but how can we, like, tailor specific communication techniques to perform each player better. Like, they have a nutritionist, sports psychologist, they have the best support staff in the scene. And I think that's like the benchmark for what every team's going to hit. And even if they might not win tournaments, like, Astralis as a team definitely feel like just so far ahead of everyone else in terms of how conscious they are of, like, their goals and what they want to achieve, and the reality of playing CS. Because I think at the end of the day, so much of individual skill and form feels ephemeral, because you're just going tournament to tournament to tournament, and players are so susceptible to burnout that that individual form is so hard to be consistent. And that's why I think it comes in waves. But when you just go to the big events and you prepare for like 3 weeks before each event, then I don't think individual form is as nebulous. And so I think when I hear things like that, I feel like that's where this is a transitionary era, where you have teams like Fnatic who just say fuck it and just try to beat Astralis just by trying to match them in man for man, and they can at times. But I just definitely feel like that sort of win condition is just going to go away over time, and that CS as a competitive endeavor is just moving far more into professional sports type space, where the top teams are going to be those teams who can, first of all, afford to skip 3 like 250k events to prepare for the major, can like have the resources to enable their stars to have sustained periods of individual form, and have this super structured style that is also flexible in a sense. And all that requires so much time and management. And I think that's why these next few months are going to be the transitionary period into a time where like the top 4 teams are all sort of clones of Astralis in one way or another.
I think it's not a coincidence that historically, if you look at all the teams in the kind of regions that have been parallel to Astralis in success, like if you look at back in 2015 and 2014, it was, you know, the French and the Swedes, they're all dead now, you know, especially the French are very dead. Sorry, Envy. And, you know, the year after, the Brazilians and, you know, the international team at FaZe, they're also both pretty dead right now. And Astralis is still doing great. They're still the same team, you know, same 3 players. And I think that that's a testament to how deliberate and intellectual they are in the way that they make decisions. They just make better decisions than people, well, in game, but out of game as well. And they've been able to, like, for example, one device was sick. He just left for 3 months. So, yeah, this sucks. Yeah. You know, like, we're just going to take it because we've had device. He's our star player for 4 years now. We want him to have him for another 4 years. So we'll take it. We'll take the time out. We'll lose money, but, you know.
Or when Kirby's underperforming, he doesn't get kicked within 2 months. They try like every single fucking possible thing, which inadvertently, like, it might have caused like series of shit results. But the things they learnt from that period of time, if you look at it sort of from a more macro perspective, like, we realize dupreeh can just fucking AWP on an international level. You know what I mean? Like, Zipnix can be more active on T side. He's actively integrating that aggression into his current game. Glaive had to sort of call a more looser style because of Dennis's time in the team. Like, the amount that Astralis learnt by trying things and not kicking Kirby, as most teams would have done, has actually benefited them so much more when they did eventually kick him and bring in Magisk. Because I don't feel like Astralis is that team that just has this period of poor results and is just all spiteful towards each other and just writes off that entire era of play. Like, everything learnt in that time is sort of how I thought this time with existing FaZe was going to go. Like, we might not necessarily have big results, but this is data that we can use in what-if scenarios for future lineups. And so, yeah, I 100% agree with you, Sam. Like, Astralis is next level.
It's also worth noting that, like, those players that have come through, like dupreeh and Zipex, but it, like, device more than any other, have really developed as players. Like, they've gotten better and better as time's gone on, right? Yeah. Like, you look at dupreeh before he became like a connector player for like a year at entry fragging. Yeah, he's pretty good, you know. But look at him now after doing that for a year in his entry fragging. He's like the best entry fragger in the world by far. So to me, that's like, that just shows how, and Zipex is like in career best form right now. So to me,
yeah,
that's
he was so sick at
even Glaive on an individual level.
Yeah. So like to me, that's a testament to how they're able to outlast other people and change and morph and develop more so, like just internally as people and as players, more so than any other. Like look at Happy right now. Like Happy was laughing.
Look at SK,
Astralis.
dude. Look at SK right now. Fucking Cold Zero's playing Insight on Mirage because he has to get in-game leader. Like, dude, that like, you know what I mean? Like, they might be a good team in 12 months, but you can be sure as fuck that they're not going to be a top team that's constantly winning tournaments for the next 6.
Yeah.
By the way, I think I said in an episode that I thought I gave it a 40% chance of SK falling apart completely, going down to VP levels. And you guys are, that's crazy. Don't get carried away. Just saying. But Max, you gave you mentioned FaZe, and I sort of want to get into this FaZe Astralis topic. We can maybe brush on the rivalry sort of thing going on in a bit. But I had a question about like talking about these macro concepts in history and the progression of the scene. I think we're seeing two radically different approaches between Astralis and FaZe in terms of their pick and ban phase, because you sort of had this interesting experiment, this interesting test where both their permabans got removed. You know, Cobblestone was removed for both teams, and then you see, I thought a great choice of Astralis banning Mirage, and a interesting choice, I guess, of FaZe sort of switching up their permaban every game and just sort of playing off their opponents. I mean, I'm not going to go too in depth in why I think one's bad and one's very questionable, but what do you think about this sort of attempt? Astralis being very pragmatic in banning Mirage, while FaZe being more optimistic in trying with the 7-map pool thing.
Well, I mean, you saw it in the final, right? Like, it blew my mind when Astralis let Cash in, because we're talking about like the perm bans and stuff like that, but I think Astralis and FaZe both had the massive benefit of being specialists in off maps before the change happened. Like, you obviously had Astralis overpass FaZe on Cash, so even when both the and you know, both teams, I guess, can play nuke on a decent level, maybe Astralis more so than FaZe, but I think they both had the benefit of being flexible in the map pool before the change happened. And yeah, I don't know. I would have loved to talk to Astralis as to why they would ban Mirage instead of Cash in that final thing, and why, and I guess why FaZe didn't back themselves on removing Overpass. Like, I would have, you know what I mean? So the stylistic differences in map pool, I think, also comes down to whether you want to innovate more so on these comfort picks of Inferno Mirage or become specialists on the off maps. And I think that's what defines a lot of the difference in approaches. And I think for a team like FaZe, who I don't know, they just, it feels like they rely more so on confidence in their map pick rather than the confidence in their strategy and how they're feeling going in towards a map, rather than their actual tactics in it. I can understand the difference. Whereas Astralis is like, oh no, and you know, the classic example is obviously the SK Astralis Krakow round of 8 game, where it's like, yeah, even though we might on paper might not be as prepared for this matchup, like we know, because we've prepared for this for the last 2 weeks, we know we can beat you on this map because we've watched 1,000 demos and have these
talking about the overpass game.
Yeah, the overpass game. Yeah. And so I think it's just as much a difference between approaches to map pool as it's just a general sort of drawn out difference between how the teams approach games in general. So I don't know what to say.
I think you can draw the distinction in another way, which between, so like in ethics, this is okay.
This is classic Sam W.
Hold on, let me just.
So in ethics, we draw a distinction between rule moralities and action moralities or act moralities. So rule moralities will, in a criterion of right action, will say, well, the best thing to do in general is this, right? And the act morality will say the best thing to do right now is this, and you'll draw different conclusions. I think probably because Astralis mentally rely very heavily on preparation, they like to come into a tournament knowing what maps they're going to play. Like, okay, the best thing to do right now, looking at the scene, is Mirage. We won a lot of Mirage in Marseille, but it was touch and go. Like it wasn't like we were supposed to win those maps necessarily. You know, that's not a reliable map for us, and a lot of the best teams in the world are very good on that map. We're probably not going to be dominant on this map. It's very unlikely. In fact, we're probably going to beat quite often on this map. So let's ban it. And they ban it, so they stop preparing for it, and they do all the other maps. So they've made a strategic decision, just like FaZe, but they've done a strategic decision for a LAN or for a section of preparation, whether that's a LAN or 3. But for a period of time, okay, for this, we're going to create a rule. We ban Mirage for this period of time. Meanwhile, FaZe probably rely much less on preparation. And so they look opponent to opponent and try to decide, oh, well, this person, you know, this, like, we're not going to ban Mirage against Astralis because they're less good on it. But if we're playing against Mouse, we're going to ban Mirage, for example. Yeah. And I think that that distinction, which is contingent on their preparation and how comfortable they feel, is really what's creating these vastly different results in the pick ban.
That's a really good point. I agree with that.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that it seems like FaZe now has this map Cash, which is a very specialist pick. It was never popular.
Which you predicted.
Yes, which was I did predict that FaZe should play Cash, which they're picking a lot. And if you looked at Astralis' first picks through the last 2 tournaments, they're very willing to switch up what they want to first pick in a best of 3. So they'll do Nuke, they'll do Overpass, they'll do Train. They did Dust 2, I think, versus mousesports. Did I get that right? Yeah, right? They did Dust 2 first pick?
I think that was the last map, but let me check. But
I think it was the first pick of the best of 3.
Maybe so.
Yeah. But anyway, I think they have like Max was saying, and Sam, I think you were touching on this too. They have such a great mentality for their like approach to the game that like I was saying before, they're sort of ahead of the times. This idea of banning Mirage instead of some other map that some specialist picks they don't like, I think is genius, because every team plays Mirage, every team plays Inferno. Why even try to contest that? I think it's so smart for them to just say, okay, that's a map we've never succeeded on. You can either go, they could abandon Inferno too, because I think that's been a problem map for them for a long time. And just avoid all these teams like Mirage, not Mirage, but like Navi, like FaZe, like mousesports on Mirage and Inferno. So yeah, I think it's really smart. With the FaZe, like I think FaZe is in the same article where I talked about FaZe maybe trying to go towards Cash, and maybe this is a good idea. Is their Cash good now or not? FaZe, I criticize them for being too optimistic, too I think cocky. I think there's a certain cockiness and aggressiveness in Kerrigan's idea of what he wants to do in the pick and ban phase, which can work out fantastically, as we saw in the Astralis versus FaZe matchup in 2017, where FaZe did that thing with Cobblestone that one tournament and had that advantage in the pick and ban phase going forward. But I'm less certain that a team can practice 7 maps or can work with 7 maps and just sort of pick. I've never seen that work before, and it didn't work for FaZe when they tried to fuck around with bans. When they first formed this lineup with this not this 5-man lineup, but the 5-man lineup with Olafmeister and Guardian. But maybe transitioning over to this point, talking about the Astralis FaZe matchup, like I think if I would have to guess the temperature on you guys regarding FaZe, you're not that high on them right now with Exist. But they beat Astralis in a best of 5. Like, what is there something going on here? What did you think of that final? What do you think of the that matchup specifically? Maybe Sam, do you have a comment on this?
I think Device tweeted this out, but I think Guardian fucked Device. Especially on Cash, like he molested him, and that's a really big problem because, like, as I think it was Sunny who said in an interview with you. He said, like, on Astralis, the only person that has the freedom to create openings and do whatever he wants is Device. And so if a Device can't do whatever he wants, or he's not getting away with that, like, a big part of what gives Astralis the edge, right, the first kill, is gone. And I think that doesn't ruin Astralis at all, but it does it does dull the blade a little bit, and it does remove a bit of the sort of dominance and firepower that they have over some other teams. And I think that takes the
spice. Where's that spice?
Yeah. And I think that when you kind of shut down Device as Guardian did, that does make it seem a lot more like Astralis was with Kirby. but they're like, okay, they're really good tactically, but you know, they're not as, and because Device wasn't that amazing during the fall either, probably because he was ill, but you know, he wasn't that amazing. And when you turn back to that and you get killed, like you just got killed so often in transition between the bomb plant by Guardian and Car on Cash, and it's just like it's hard to see them winning those post plants when they don't have their best player in those post plants, right? And I think that, or rather in the early post plant, obviously Zipex is the last one alive most of the time. So I think that was a big problem for them. They also, and Kerrigan tweeted this out, but I also thought that this was true, they played pretty cocky. So I think that they, especially on Overpass, like it felt like they were so confident that they were going to win that map because they should have won that map easily. And so they kind of let it slip quite often. Like the fact that I think they gave up 5 rounds or 10 on their on FaZe's T side or something like that. There's stuff that should never happen. Like they won both pistols in that map. They should have won that map. There's no question. And they did weird plays. Like it felt like they were always trying to make that Nico player, that Stewie 2K play of sitting in a smoke, you know, and they were kind of sitting there and doing whatever, trying to make a play. And that can work, but it was so repetitive, and they were winning some rounds, but it was costing them quite a few rounds as well. And it wasn't any specific player. It was FaZe. It was Glaive. It was Dupree. It was, I think I saw Zipex do it once as well, and it just felt like they were playing a little ballsy. It felt like they were playing against a significantly worse team than they are, which is true of FaZe normally, but with players like Guardian and Nico playing very well, and Rain playing super well, it felt like you can't get away with that shit when those players are feeling it and have the game sense to realize that you sitting in a smoke is an opportunity to get a free kill.
Yeah, I think that tied in big. I can't remember what map it was on specifically, but I remember like watching a few rounds sort of in between doing interviews on the tournament, and I saw Glaive get tilted from like a 2v1 or something. Like I remember just seeing his face cam, and he like fully did the like lean back, hands in his head. Just
I do. It was when they lost the 1v2 to Exist.
Yeah, and seeing shit like that, I'm like, damn, son. Like,
no, that was Overpass. A-side Overpass.
That never happens to Glaive, especially.
But that was bullshit.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was bullshit though, because like Exist just did this thing where he flicked to one guy, killed him, flicked to the other guy, killed him, and they took 2 bullets. So Glaive just got like to shoot 2 bullets. So I think it was just like, what the fuck is this? And they lost the game partially because of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like shit like that. But then you see that, and then like 2 rounds later, you see that fucking like nade stack onto Exist like at B. And I think that's just the dichotomy of Astralis in so many ways, just like losing that bullshit moment, but then the very next round winning from complete tactical genius. But going back to the Guardian point, I think straight up when Guardian's in form, and this was said by, you wouldn't know, but not because you don't know, but because of the Chiefs AWPer Sterling. He's sort of one of these up-and-coming Australian AWPers, really, really smart guy. And I asked him who they scrimmed in Sydney. And he's like, oh, yeah, you know, we did really well. We played, you know, Mouse, G2, and RG. Like, I did all right against Cirque, but Cirque was pretty fast, you know, like breaking down how all the different AWPers go. I'm like, oh, and how was it like playing against Guardian? And he just went silent for about 10 seconds, and I was like, Guardian is the best anti-AWPer in the world. Just straight up. Like he says, I've never seen anything like it. Like the guy is just wins every single AWP v AWP when he is in form. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then you see the Astralis Grand Finals, and you're like, fuck, there's some meat to that statement, you know? So when I think Guardian's in form, especially against Astralis, if we want to talk about that matchup in the rivalry, it gets really, really interesting because of how well, especially when Exist is playing well, and people might dismiss Exist's performance in Sydney, but I think he had some absurd, especially like overpass rounds like that. Like he was incredible for FaZe, especially given how low our expectations were of him heading into this lineup. I think Exist played really well relative to what we expect. Guardian was super in form. And yeah, when you have that combination of players, even teams as prepared and as high level as Astralis, you know, FaZe is that sort of old dog boxer who can just still has that right hand. You know, he might not have the footwork, might not have the fucking tactics down, but he can still fucking knock you out if he's in form, you know, so.
Well, it's an interesting thing with FaZe, maybe transitioning to talking about the rest of the scene, where I mean, the initial skepticism with FaZe was like, oh, there's too many stars. Is there going to be the team play? And with FaZe, still, you see still in the post plans, you see like Guardian just walking, trying to get an angle on someone, like when instead of waiting for the whole team to coalesce, or you just see someone try to push a smoke like Nico or someone, and just try to force things. And it's not the same sort of team as Astralis, but with the existence of Exist on that team, it is a transition away from pure firepower, whether it's involuntary or not. And with team and you sort of have teams out there like mousesports, like Cloud9, that have been called FaZe clones in the past. Cloud9 picking up an in-game leader with 2K leaving. It seems like there is a bit of a transition away from the pure firepower stack. Do you think this is going to continue? Is this a temporary aberration? Do you think that where do you see that people challenge you Astralis from? Do you think that mousesports? I think Sam, I didn't get to read your article on mousesports. They come out today, right?
Yeah.
Do you think there's a way for teams like mousesports to challenge Astralis? Do they need to make a player change? What do you think about this dynamic?
That's an interesting question. I don't think mousesports is ever going to be Astralis in a best of 3.
No.
But there's 2 reasons. So the first is because of the map pool. The fact that Astralis bans Mirage just for now, it's just like
that's huge, right?
Because mousesports relies so much on that map. They don't have, at least in my opinion, they don't have a very deep map pool. So they can only really contest. I forget which map they won, but they can only really contest them on Inferno, maybe.
It was Inferno. They won Inferno in 1917, I think.
Nuke, maybe. Like I was optimistic about Dust 2 because I saw them play Dust 2 against, I think it was G2, and I thought, they look pretty good, But no, they got fucked. So I don't think if they don't have the map pool, that's one problem. The second problem with mousesports is my article was optimistic because I was saying that I don't think that Fnatic is going to stay a top 14 for very long, but I do think that mousesports will. I didn't say that they're going to be the best team in the world because I don't think that they have the players to be the best team in the world. Like, I don't think they have a world-class team. I don't think they have a world-class opper. I don't think that they have world-class rifles. Like, I think they have amazing players, and they're all great, but I don't think that Sunny is as good as Rain, for example. I don't think that Oscar is as good as Device. I don't think he's as good as Guardian. So that's a problem. Like, they have an advantage maybe in terms of their in-game leader being pretty remarkable at a few things, but I don't think that they're ever going to beat them. That said, mousesports are really good at doing map control strats, like around mid on Mirage, and so they can definitely upset someone like Astralis on one map by being very creative and stuff like that. But I think that it's about like that's going to work better against FaZe than it will against Astralis, because FaZe might have a couple defaults they can run, and if their defaults get countered by a specific map control play, then Kit will get fucked. But Astralis is so tactically diverse that I can't see them get wrecked for like 3 gun rounds by the same play. And so I don't think they're like, it would be cool if they did, because I like mousesports, but I don't think they're ever going to beat Astralis in best of 3.
Do you know what change they could? What change if there wasn't without doing a realistic real world interpretation of who's available, what are the contracts? Is there a player change they can do to move up to that level, or do you think that it's just too slim pickings, or would this be? Is this not really in their wheelhouse? Do you think it's impractical to even think about it?
I don't think. Well, the problem is that. So, okay, to make this point, I have to abstract a little bit to something that we've touched upon or hinted at here, which is the relationship between skill and strats as the years have come by. I think that what's happened over time is not just that teams have gotten more skilled, is that even teams that are strategically focused have become more skilled. So, for example, Astralis did make a firepower upgrade. I think what we're seeing, though, is that because everyone is skilled, you need to have a certain skill floor. Like people like North, people like VP that just don't have the skill to compete with some of the new teams that came around last year, just can't fight. Like North probably isn't going to be like Hellraisers or Space Soldiers. Why? Because they might be better tactically, maybe, but they don't have the firepower to compete with those teams. And so what we saw with Astralis last year is that, yeah, they didn't really have, like, Kirby wasn't enough of a star to really push them and beat the two best teams in the world in SK and FaZe. And so they did make a firepower upgrade. The key is that you need to make smart firepower upgrades when they come by. Like, they need to fit role-wise, right? Like Kirby,
and they can't disrupt the existing strategy, or they need to bolster the strategy in such a way. So
if you're looking at the role setup in Mouse, I would say that tactically they're pretty sound. I would say that they need a better in-game leader, but I don't want to remove Chris J because I think that Chris J is a really good player and a pretty good in-game leader. But I do think that they have mid-round calls that are problematic, and so. But I don't want to remove him. I don't want to remove Oscar because he's like a top 5 opera in the world, but he's distinctively worse than the other 4. And so your only option is to like steal maybe Woxic. Like that's the only move that I could see being an upgrade. So that's difficult. Sunny is amazing, but I think he's like the 3rd best player at his role. So, and then Rops is great, but I don't think he plays a lot of anchor roles, and I don't think that he's quite as good as other players like Zipex at playing those anchor roles. And Sticko is fine, but he isn't like Zipex, right? He isn't one of those players. So every player is like pretty good, like top 5 at their roles maybe.
It's just, and all the top teams have the better players.
Exactly.
So it doesn't seem practical for them to get better.
See, I think you can.
Actually, Max, I was going to redirect a question to you. What Max was Sam was just saying actually seemed to contradict what you were saying at the very beginning of the episode about teams, the skills not being a difference. That there was.
I was about to.
Okay.
So I think there is definitely within like the bottom of the top 10 players who can operate in, and this is the biggest caveat to this is obviously you can't make these changes just because of contracts and shit like that. But for example, I think if you kept the core of what Oscar, Sunny, and Rops, and then changed out Chris J and Sticko, you could have a team that wouldn't be Astralis level consistency, but wouldn't be FaZe level dominance over Astralis, but could operate in that sort of area at a higher level than what Mouse is doing right now. So I think, for example, like fuck it, let's get Fallen and Elige in that core. Like get Elige to replace Chris J's role, and then get Fallen to replace what Sticko is doing, but be the caller and the secondary AWPer. So it's like you're essentially getting like parts of Chris J's game and parts of Sticko's game in different variations of Fallen and Elige. Like the amount of talent within the top 10 and outside the top 10, like as you talked about like how Woxic could be in this lineup, and he's not even in a top 10 team. So I definitely think that there are players who can play in mousesports that would upgrade them. But then the obvious thing is like, do you want to make such a high level change for something that can make you an 8th best team in the world as opposed to floating around the top 5? So I think, especially with how dominant mousesports and Astralis looking with the top tier lineup, like mediocrity relative to previous successes can be accepted more. So yeah, I acknowledge that in a way, but I also think that I think it's crazy that there are legitimately like a handful of names outside the top 10 who can compete on Mouse tomorrow in a perfect world and contend with the likes of Astralis and FaZe.
Yeah. Maybe this is a dumb point. This is like a dumb Reddit fantasy point, but I mean, if you add Simple to any team in the top 10, that's like an instant giant upgrade, right?
Especially Oscar. Because Oscar plays similarly to Simple.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think, definitely. I think that would be a big upgrade. I mean, it's sort of weird where we don't see Simple at this last tournament because, there's just so much momentum around.
It would have gone so different, I am Sydney, if Navi was there, straight up. Yeah. Like, I would have, I think that was a massive low-key caveat to this entire tournament, bigger than the fact that Dust 2 was added in the pool, was the fact that, like, if you look at the tournament and how much of an impact Dust 2 actually had on the results versus the impact that Navi would have had in terms of the placings, what happened in the lower bracket, especially with so many upsets, and especially looking at how Renegades beat FaZe in the upper bracket of the groups. Like, I think that was a bigger caveat to Sydney than anything else, was the fact Navi and Simple weren't there.
Yeah. Okay. So Stu Shrew actually wrote this article recently where he said, okay, for a while now, we haven't had a specific team being dominant. And what's really categorizing this period of play is actually simple, that he's just so incredible, so apart from the rest of the player, that it actually should be called the simple eras. Is this even worth entertaining? I mean, I sort of cut my internet failing at the end of the last episode, sort of cut off the simple discussion. Do you think that simple deserves that much plaudits, Sam? Is that a reasonable take on this area of play?
That's a difficult question. I haven't read the articles, so I think that Simple is probably the most dominant player we've ever seen as of now. I think that he might be revolutionary in the sense that he kind of shows you everything that a player can be in terms of being able to do everything in the game. So maybe in terms of what we thought was possible for a player, that's revolutionary. But in terms of when I think of eras or something like that, I think of metas or something. I don't think that he's changed the meta of the game. Maybe Max has a different opinion for me on this, but I don't think that he's done anything. Like, I don't think Navi is doing something very special. I just think that Simple is a special player, and we'll remember it. Like when we think of the first half of 2018, we will think of Simple. So if that's what Stooch's argument was, then sure, I think that he's almost single-handedly carried Navi into relevancy, at least at their first tournament run, maybe not their second. So yeah, I think he's been dominant, but I don't think that he's changed the game. I don't think that in a year we're going to think like, oh, that was a breaking point and a new style of Counter-Strike erupted or anything like that.
See, I'd take that in a different direction, because in my model of the game and how I see it going, as I set up earlier with how like things are going to be more professional, things are going to be more team-based, I think this will be the Simple era, just because he will be eventually, like, he won't be this good. And so this period at which he is just straight fucking hard carrying Navi into, it's like the last breath of individualism, like in CSGO, just like this last superstar, like that green light that shoots up before the fucking moon sets, just to signal transition into a different era of play. Like it is just it's changing the meta in a way, in a sense that it's like no team has ever had to leverage talent at that level into wins. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of just like the classic like superhero thing. It's like, it's too much power, just like just taking all the knowledge. And so I think in that sense, just trying to figure out a way to effectively use a tool like Simple in a team has caused some changes into the way maybe other teams look at Navi and how they model their own superstars in the game. Because then you have to ask questions about Simple's superstar power. Is it like, is he more effective when he is structured in a slow Zeus sort of way? Or is it better if we just give him total freedom and then force the other 4 players to play a structured brand of CS around Simple? Like it forces you to reevaluate how you even sort of integrate superstars in a team with how good he is as a player. Because it feels like no matter what you do with Simple, you're going to be getting like a massively bolstered set of results. It's just a matter of how effective you can bolster those results with his power. So I feel like in a way, Simple forces not only Navi, but pretty much every single team in the world to reevaluate how they look at integrating superstar talent. And then I also think that he will be probably, one of the last sort of old titans of just straight superstar talent before we move into a different era of CS.
I think that you make a good point with how teams think. I think teams will look at their rosters differently and how good their players are, because it's not what happened with SK. Like, it's just like what the fuck was that? Okay, let's try to sign this guy. So to be fair, that is a thing. If Fallen is like, oh, this guy's so good that whatever, I don't give a shit. I need this guy on my team. I'll take 2 players to have.
Or even worse, it's just like, oh fuck it, Cold Zero lead. I want to try to do what Simple's doing. Like
Yeah, maybe he did say he wanted to focus on individual players. So I think that maybe in that way, but but to be fair, I don't think that you wrote an article about aim once on Medium. It probably your best piece you've ever wrote, by the way, but it was on Medium, so you did get paid.
All compliments.
Did get paid, of course. Just got a lot of claps.
I think that that kind of gives players like Simple an in to always being very dominant. Like I always think there's going to be players that are better than the system they're playing against, right? So I think maybe not like 1.45 HLTV rating. That's kind of fucking crazy. But I think that last year you saw players that were like extremely dominant. Like I think that what Nico did in 2017 wasn't quite like Simple, but it was a sign of like, yeah, sure, you can I can solo hold a B bomb site. You can do everything right, but I can stand in Fountain and kill all of them.
But the difference, Sam, is that if Simple was doing what he was doing right now in 2014, Na'Vi would be the best team in the world and they would have won a string of tournaments. I honestly think that. Whereas, like, Na'Vi are really, really, really good. But at the end of the day, they lost a best of 3 to Astralis and Marseille. Like, I just don't think that Kenny S levels of form or simple levels of form don't make you the best team in the world anymore. And that will become more of a point as time goes on and as teams prepare more, structure more, and are more used to dealing with superstar talent like this. I think it's just so much harder, even though the like guiding principles of CS, as I pointed out in the article, essentially means that aim and being a superstar can, in theory, transcend everything. In practice, I think that teams are better at neutralizing stars of this level, especially with tighter coordination. And so that's sort of the underlying...
See, you would think that, but at the same time, we thought when Kenny S did his thing that was the peak of Counter-Strike. And then here you are, like 4 years later, things have changed a lot in terms of the meta. Teams are significantly better than they are then. Or they were then. The op got nerfed, and you still have main opper being better than he was then. And so I think that it's true that like those players have less space. And so, for example, to be as dominant, Simple has to be better than Kenny S was then to be as dominant.
It's a result of him having to like play against so much better competition. Because I think like Kenny S, like these players have to push the increased level of competition in order to rise above it. And so I think we might see higher peaks in Simple and Kenny S moving forward just by virtue of the increased level of play, and what it will take to transcend that increased level of play will be just more for an individual player. But in terms of the actual impact that sort of transcendent play can have on a game, I just really, really struggle to see, like, in practice, how someone like Simple at an even better level than what he is could like single-handedly beat Astralis in a best of 3. Like maybe if fucking Simple was on FaZe tomorrow, it's a different story. But in terms of just straight looking at what a player can do in a round, I just really, really struggle to see.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it seems like it can almost go in two directions, right? Where you have some teams sort of going the Astralis route, or if like Simple gets a good team around him, or if he moves to a team where he vastly increases the level of skill on that team, it could sort of be a divergence in the route that you take in terms of how you want to match up with the best teams in the world. But sort of going into a different area, I hinted at this before the show was going to start, that I had this sort of oddball sort of direction where there's a lot of complaints on Twitter about the CZ75 and how it's so ridiculously overpowered, and that sort of just gets annoying after it's so repetitive. But I was thinking about the beginning of 2017. You had this interesting change where it was the combination of the UMP sort of being discovered. Well, it was nerfed like few months beforehand, but it was sort of realized how strong it was, which in turn buffed force buys. It seemed like a lot of teams would do those early buys and would just do UMP. And do you have a point?
No, one moment.
Okay, one moment. Okay, I'll just finish my point. But with the UMP, it seemed like that it was like a coalescence of factors. One, that because the scene was so poor or inconsistent in late 2016, leading to the teams combining their talents, regions combining their talents in 2017, along with the UMP nerf or buff. Led to skill-based teams or more loose teams being rising to the top of the scene. And then there's this UMP, not the UMP, the CZ change right now, which is different in the sense that it almost I don't. It's sort of a weird change where it doesn't seem that it's necessarily promoting force buys, but it does seem it changes things in terms of how teams want to approach buying, in the sense that it seems more dangerous. Like to just with every
it's
single
cheaper.
one.
It's cheaper.
It's just cheaper. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like people are half buying and that leads to the shitty halves where people just half buy. It's more like it's just there's always that risk in the background where you could just get CZ'd that round. Do you think this is changing play at all? Is there anything to this? Do you think this is having some effect on the scene?
See, I think it sort of borrows from the UMP time when everyone was complaining about the UMP. It feels more so that that individuals are better just across the board, and that the CZ is just this tool to express that, as opposed to the CZ itself being super broken. Because when I see games, I don't necessarily think like games aren't defined by the CZ. You know what I mean? Games are defined if the CZ is in fact by a star player popping the fuck off, and then the next round doing the same thing but with a rifle, and then winning 3 rounds in a row. Like if Ben Tep does something crazy for Tyloo and upsets, and one of those rounds out of 6 is with the CZ, it's not because the CZ is broken, it's because Ben Tep is broken. Like he's doing something crazy. So I think that's the key distinction. I feel like it's very, very easy, especially from a player's perspective, when you know you shouldn't lose those rounds and it can feel like a bullshit round, to blame it on the CZ. But I think looking more so at the bigger picture, and it gets obviously different when you're talking about teams like, say, Fnatic or SK, who can have 5 like sort of fractions of Bentets running around with CZs and doing the same thing. Then I can understand why, because then it's not more so just one player, but it's a team of diluted versions of that player having star level performances. And then I can see why the CZ could be in effect. But really, how often, I would love to know the actual statistics on how often we see rounds caused by multiple players using the CZ and winning duels against fully armored opponents directly result in round wins, and how many of those round wins make up a percentage of a map, or like swing rounds or something like that. Because just by the eye test and from feeling out upsets, it always seems like it's something more systemic and something more problematic with the other team, as opposed to just this one weapon that's doing the damage. But yeah, I don't know if any of you disagree with me on that.
No, that seems to make sense. Sam, do you have a point on this? Do you think in any way the CZ's affecting the meta in terms of which teams can succeed and which teams can't, or how it affects the popularity of maps? Do you think there's some sort of underlying force here, or is it just something annoying that pro players like to complain about on Twitter?
So, okay, I can have 2 opinions here, which one, I don't think it significantly affects anything, but 2, I do think it is annoying and it should be changed. So when I said like before this call, like, oh, it's not broken, like what I mean is it's not like beforehand, like if we're thinking about how the CZ was like 2 or 3 years ago, before it had a 12 mag and before it was like pretty like what it is now, it was a pretty it was a pretty fucking broken weapon, or the Tech 9, like stuff like that. But I think that the core problem with the Tech 9 and this one too, more so than the fact that it breaks the meta, is just it feels really unfair to get killed by one oftentimes. So there was a really poignant round. It was Henry G casting, and Rox had a 5-7, the only player I see using a 5-7, and he was holding apps on Inferno, and he just got a double dink on 2 players with a 5-7 and got a double kill and broke the round. But no one felt like that was bullshit, even though it was just a pistol, because like he hit them twice in the head. Like it was impressive. Yeah. But with the CZ, because it's like you can run so fast with it, and it's an automatic weapon, like you can hit a person in the head once, and all you need to do is keep holding it, and they're basically fucked, right? Yeah. You don't need to aim twice.
One of the bullshitty things with it is when it's taken to mid range and long range. Because I'm fair copping it if you can get caught out by creeping players, and that dink and the spray happens and it happens close. Where the CZ feels the most bullshit for me is, say it's in that exact same position where like Rops is at Van holding apps, and then he like kills a player with like the dink and the spray from like that and get to long range. That's when it feels bullshit to me, because that's not what the weapon should be.
Yeah. So to me, it's the fact that it's both $500 automatic, and it can kill someone in 2 shots, and you move really fast with it. So it's pretty hard to like. There was that controversy when Glaive was in a 1v1 clutch, and he pulled up the CZ. You know, it was on B Inferno, this was at Marseille because it was just easier because he was one tick from death and he was just moving so fucking fast that it was almost impossible to kill him. And okay, like if you can jiggle peek so fast with that weapon, and it's basically like in all effects as good as if you had an M4 in that situation because it's an automatic weapon, one hit to the head and you win the clutch. Like that feels really unfair. So I don't think it's meta breaking. I do think it should change. It's when I talk to people are super divided about how to change it. So like maybe running accuracy is one. Maybe it's damage at distance. Maybe it needs to kill you in 3 bullets when you're in mid range or something like that. But so to me, like, people complain about it a lot, but people haven't found a fix for how to make it less bad. So it's frustrating. It's frustrating both for the players playing it. It's also frustrating for me reading it, saying like, sure, but what's the solution? Like I get your frustration, but it's really having no impact. And so I think go ahead. I just think it's one of the more nuanced things. I think it's one of the more nuanced issues that we have in Counter-Strike.
Yeah. Well, I mean, then there's this sort of theory that like if they get rid of the CZ, there's something else that's going to be abused, and it's just going to be a cycle. It doesn't seem I think it doesn't seem as meta affecting. It just seems like it does lead to these rounds where it looks sort of bullshit, but it doesn't seem like with the UMP thing. There's just so many broken halves where it seems like it's directly affecting. I thought ops, like I thought SK was struggling a lot when at the beginning of 2017 because they couldn't do those dual ops, and they sort of had to really adjust their style with FNX. I'm forgetting Phelps. I was like Fox, FNX. Yeah, okay, Phelps. With Phelps, and then you saw teams like G2 struggling with it, where it just seems like it's this more annoying than anything. But I thought I'd bring it up since such a common complaint. Is there any other out there other than the op meta or the CZ meta? Is there any wild era? Is there any wild ideas of what this era could be?
The Tai Lu era, baby. I'm fucking all in on APAC right now. You should have felt the atmosphere in IM Sydney. If you asked any person walking around if Renegades will win the Face It Major, it would have been a hard yes, followed by a lot of shouting. I think in that, like, I feel like the overall push of the teams outside the top 10 is going to define so much what happens at the top, because there's so much knock-on and ripple effects in a tournament like IM Sydney with what happens in the group stages and in the quarterfinals and semifinals. And especially when you look at how much SK is struggling right now, how sort of much defined by looseness and volatility teams like NIP and Fnatic are. I think so much of this coming era will just be the steadfastness and righteousness of teams playing loose like NIP and Fnatic, and then the tier 2 and teams below that level looking to try and contest them and match them on an individual level and having to raise their own skill in order to sort of match NIP and Fnatic on that looseness, and then trying to beat them by playing structured and trying to get to that level by having the extra win condition over the straight individual firepower of those teams. And because of how the scene works, I feel like that's going to be so interesting to watch in the next era of play.
Okay, I have actually a thing. This is not an era thing, but it is a trend. And we've been talking about this, but we haven't addressed it directly, which is the way that skill is translated through this top 15 is I don't think we've ever had such a stacked top 15 in terms of individual skill, and I don't think we ever found such a between 5 and 15 so much vertical mobility. You know what I mean? Like it's just so easy for one team to outdo another. And I think that the pivotal case of this, which will end up being like this is how you become 5th best, is mousesports. Because in terms of like 100%, let's take individual skill and also Cloud9, but Cloud9 have died. So, like old Cloud9, but more mousesports now because they stayed relevant. I think both teams had skill that was like, here's an example. I don't think that those two teams are distinctively much more skilled than like Space Soldiers, but they're significantly better than Space Soldiers. Well, why is it? Well, one team, like teams like NIP, teams like Fnatic, and teams like Space Soldiers play a really simple and predictable brand of Counter-Strike. Like, that JW is going to push connector every fucking round on Mirage, and you're going to kill him almost always. Like, you know that Mage is going to sit at the back of Mirage and in the middle on a T side default, and you're going to kill him. If you're mousesports, if you're a team that has similar skill, but you have a good coach, you have a good in-game leader, and you can actually take advantage of the tools that you have and create a really fundamentally sound early game, like, you're just going to win. You're just going to get an edge on those players because you're both teams that have belligerent players that play super aggressively, but yours is doing it in a way that makes sense, that is taking into account the aggression of the other player. So if you're mousesports and you're playing against Zantares, you have players that can be like Zantares. Yeah. But you tell them, no, just wait, throw this flashbang, do this, we're going to do a bait setup, and we're going to kill him over and over again, right? Yeah. And I think that sort of contrast between teams like Space Soldiers, teams like NIP, and teams like mousesports who have similar compositions of players, realistically, like, it's not like anyone on mousesports is like any player on Astralis. They're not incredibly cerebral players that, they're not Zipex, but they are playing smart Counter-Strike. They're playing tactical Counter-Strike, and in a sort of like explosive way. They're not playing very slowly. They're playing very aggressively, but they're playing deliberately. And playing that deliberate style, not impulsive style, while still playing aggressive, I think is going to be the new generation of skilled teams that we're going to see. I think we saw it with Cloud9 with a bunch of, he called it like random plays. I think Tim, in your interview, he said we had a bunch of gimmicks on Mirage. I think that's how teams that have gimmicks, but they have a ton of them and they know how to use them and they know how to do them over and over again with success. Then those teams have a significant edge over teams that are comparable, but without those gimmicks, without that tactical side to their team, they're just running around. I think it's really important.
Could not agree with you more, Sam. In my article about Mouse a while ago, after they won what was it, Star Series, or what was the, completely blanking right now.
They're both the same. There's two events there
they're so interchangeable. Right. Anyway, but after, what was it? Yeah, Star Series. I think that's going to be the straight template for teams moving forward. Exactly what Mouse is doing. We're seeing it with Hellraisers as well, where you just have pick your choice of an international team made up of pretty much, you can make 4 Mouse level skilled teams from the 15th best teams in the world if you could just remove contracts and just pick and choose. Like, the talent, as you're saying, is retarded. But the key distinction between Mouse and every other team is they have LMBT. And he's the one that's pushing that brand of Counter-Strike. He's the one giving them the tactics. And I cannot, like, you can't sit, no one can sit there and tell you that there isn't like another 3 LMBTs in the world. You know what I mean? Like, my fix for North was to take this Mouse approach theoretically, which is to just get someone like whoever, like Kirby, a willing entry fragger who has a decent mind for the game that can just call whatever the coach tells him. They have Ave, who's, allegedly this 1.6 tactical genius, and then just bolster the lineup with a focus on balance of roles as opposed to like a balance of superstar fragger. Like, think more in terms of passivity and how aggressive players are, and think very much on how you balance the roles. Get someone who can call but isn't necessarily like a mid-roundy type, very cerebral caller. Have a coach who can tell that person exactly what they should be executing, exactly what game plan they should be doing, and then just like that. I feel like that is such a good template for success, and it's so replicable outside of what mousesports is doing. Because as you're saying, they're not doing anything special. They're just playing really good fundamental Counter-Strike with some good executes. They know exactly the tempo and what they want to, the rhythm of the round they want to sort of go for. I remember specifically they had like a 14, it was against Astralis on Cash. They had like a ridiculously good T side. And I remember it was because Astralis were playing dog shit, and this was last year individually, and Mouse were able to run over them individually. But they didn't pug. Like, there was a very, very clear game plan they had going into it where they were hitting B, faking off of it, and you can just so clearly see Chris J wasn't exactly like masterminding this entire T half. He had a plan given to him before the T side went in, executed the plan, and then mousesports could run over Astralis individually, and they had like a 13-2 T side or something like that. So yeah, I could not agree with you more, Sam. I think that is the way of the future, especially for sides that can't be, sort of like yeah, that super tactical level team.
Yeah, I think the distinction is that you have, like, you can game plan the early round, and you can tell people how to make the right decisions in the early round, because you can tell them, oh, throw this flashbang, throw this smoke, go here, go here, go here. And I think what Mouse has done so well is that I think they have pretty bad mid-round calls. Like, I don't think they're very good at it, but
I think they're just loose in the mid-round. I think that's different.
Nah, but I think that they're when I was watching them during the major time, so I haven't paid attention to this since then. During the major time, it felt like, especially on maps that they weren't like not Mirage, so like Train, on the CT side, they were having a lot of trouble because they were rotating way too freely.
Oh, CT side, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, on CT side, and I think that sure, that's a problem, and it has been a problem for them on Train regularly on CT side. But I think that one of the ways you mitigate that is by just constantly having just really strong setups early game. You can tell your players, okay, Sunny, do this, Oscar, do this, Chris J, go there, and you're gonna have a base setup, and you're gonna get 2 kills anytime anyone comes mid. And you can teach them that part of the tactic, and that can give them an in on the tactical advantage, even though they might not be able to have someone like Glaive who can make, or someone like Fallen who can make a really perfect mid-round call, right?
Yeah, and they also have Oscar, which is, he's like one of the most independent fraggers in the game. Like he is just that old man amongst a bunch of kids who just fucking runs around. He can secondary call and he can do whatever he wants, and he's a very smart player. So I feel like that's a key distinction as well.
But the thing that's beautiful about the way they use, at least on Mirage, which is their best map, the way they use Oscar on Mirage is that they always have Chris J with him, right? And they always have very specific CT side setups to make him push mid, and they have bait setups, and they're going to get success. And they're using someone who's just doing a crazy play, but they're setting up around that crazy play. They're planning on that crazy play. So when Oscar says, I just want to fucking push mid, you have a strat for that, right? Now you So that's how playing like tactically in the early game while still playing loose and taking advantage of the very aggressive nature of your players is how teams like NiP should play, how teams like Space Soldier should play. And they're not doing it right now. So I think that's the edge that mousesports has over.
It's also a difference in mindset, whereas Mouse were clearly trying to structure something new, and they were like, all right, well, we can't do what these teams are doing because we have this new core of players. And it's like, it's sort of like that classic like Moneyball mindset. It's like, let's think about things differently, man. Whereas, you know, NiP and Fnatic just have, I was about to say, but it feels like NiP and Fnatic, I just broke my chair, but that's okay. NiP and Fnatic have, these feel like far more entrenched, and it's like, oh yeah, you know, the meta just comes in waves, and we'll eventually be back on the top when the meta comes back around to being like more emphasized on loose play. But I don't know if I buy that anymore in terms of that it goes in ebbs and flows.
Look at the difference between JW and Oscar. Like, they're similar players. I know that JW isn't opping that much right now, but when JW is opping, he isn't being particularly successful. And I think the reason why is because they haven't created a game plan around the fact that he's playing successful. Like, you can play loose and deliberate. Like, you can just decide, okay, you're going to do this. I think the best example of this ever is Fur. Like, Fur does crazy shit, but SK plans around the fact that he's going to do crazy shit. And I think that that's very important to keep in mind. And I think that you've seen this in hints over time. Like, I think that North did this when they had Magisk on Overpass. But this is a whole team of just players that can do crazy shit, and that they actually do it. Yeah. Anyway, that's enough on mousesports, but I thought it was amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, Max has broken his door. Sam might have someone at the door, so maybe I'll show the audience the door and end the episode.